Hello and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast for today, August 11th, 2020. My name is Tom Luongo and we have a lot to talk about. This is episode 46 and President Trump just made Social Security a big issue for this election. I'll give you my thoughts on that in a minute, but first I want to remind you that you can follow my work over at my blog at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. Live streams, they happen every Monday night at 8 p.m. on YouTube and DLive.tv. Just search for me on both platforms and you'll find me. Warning, I'm a bad boy. I have a potty mouth and I use those words in sentences. Now, you can also support the podcast by downloading and installing the Brave browser. Now, Brave protects your online privacy by blocking all those pesky data snoopers, ads, tracking cookies, which feed the growing surveillance state. Moreover, you can earn crypto tokens called BAT for opting into Brave's ad network and use them to tip your favorite content creators who, like me, are verified publishers on the network. Be it your favorite website, YouTube, Twitch, or SoundCloud channel, click the Brave logo icon to the right of the search bar to tip your earnings and directly support the content you love through those earnings. They're like YouTube super chats, but without Google taking the 30% cut and you not having to put money up front. Lastly, you can join the more than 450 people who support me directly on Patreon at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns, where you can sign up for the twice weekly market reports covering current events and the technical state of important markets. And you can also sign up for the Gold, Goats, and Guns monthly newsletter, which ties up all the cultural, geopolitical, and economic shifts and trends into a coherent portfolio strategy designed to help you make sense of a world going mad. All right. Let's do this. Leroy Jenkins. All right. So Trump over the weekend issued 4 executive orders, and they are incredibly important. And this morning, actually, he's talking about a 5th one, which would overhaul capital gains tax. And I'll explain that in just a second as well. But the 4 over the weekend were as follows. To defer student loan payments, again, through Q4. So through the end of the year, student loans, people won't have to make payments on them, and they're not accruing any interest and penalties because federal loan rates have been slashed to 0%, which was passed in the CARES Act. Extend as well the blocking of evictions for people living in federal housing and living in housing backed by a federally backed mortgage, right? Meaning a Fannie and Freddie loan, which effectively is all mortgages in the United States. It's also going to extend federal unemployment support at $400 a week, down from $600. And the last one is to defer payroll taxes, i.e. Social Security taxes, for all of Q4. Now, as of right now, those will have to be paid at the end of the year. But for now, it gets people, all of these things together, ensure that the money you're making, or whatever money you're making right now, more of it stays in your pocket right now to help you get through the very difficult time. Taken all together, he co-opts and destroys the Democrats' best talking points. This is the main takeaway from all of this. When you really look at this, and I just wrote a blog about this, a very subject over at my blog on tomluongo.me. I'll make sure that I link it in the show notes. What's important is that he's literally taking all of the Democrats' classic talking points. The Republicans hate the rich. The Republicans only work for the banks, blah, 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 blah. All of that stuff. But the Republicans hate black people. All of those stories, all of those talking points, gone. It puts him, in my mind, firmly on the path to re-election. And I don't think Joe Biden, hiding in this gimp cellar, has any chance at beating him. As a matter of fact, we're a week out from the DNC convention in Milwaukee and they don't have a platform. They barely have a candidate, and they don't have a viable vice presidential candidate. Who are they going to pick? Susan Rice? She's likely to be indicted by John Durham. So I find all of this really funny. What Biden and company have to do is make the argument that he's not working in the people's best interest. But how do they make that argument? What he just said, if the Democrats are unwilling to pass comprehensive legislation and extend benefits and come to some kind of working agreement with us, they don't care about you. But I do, and I'm going to do what I can within the context of what's already been passed and my power that I have under executive order to do what he can. And to be honest with you, I'm not even sure about the legality of any of this stuff. And to be honest with you, I don't even care. I'm just looking at this from a purely political perspective because no one is going to challenge him without looking like a churlish troll. I mean, that describes the Democrats. I mean, I repeat myself when I say that, but it doesn't play that way for a lot of people who have always played, who always bought into this idea that the Democrats are the caring party and the Republicans are the heartless party. Well, a Republican president just cut taxes on the lower and middle classes. These are the people for whom paying Social Security is the most onerous. You make more than $137,000 a year, you stop paying Social Security on the earnings above 137 grand. It used to be 115. It's been indexed higher and higher. What's important here is to understand that those people, the people for whom Social Security is the most regressive of taxes, and regressive taxes are taxes that on a marginal basis hit people who make the least hardest. On a percentage basis, they hit you hardest. Important thing is that it keeps money in the local economy and not going right back to DC to go to quote unquote debt servicing. Because effectively all that's happening here is that money is being transferred from the working poor to the retired poor, because Social Security doesn't pay all that much. And the money gets shifted around based on demographics. And the people who are working, who are the productive members of the economy, and they're having that money taken out of their checks and forcibly saved for a future that they may never see. That last one is incredibly important. That last of the 4 executive orders is incredibly important because it's all about Social Security. Now, think about this for a second. What do the Democrats normally do during a presidential election? They create a straw man argument that attacks the Republicans for wanting to kill Social Security. I remember Bush and Gore did it in 2000. They did it again. They tried it again in 2004 with John Kerry. It didn't work. They tried it with Barack Obama in 2008. They always bring up Social Security. Whenever they want to scare old folks from voting Republican, they bring up Social Security. Whenever they are really worried that white women are going to get off of the Democratic gravy train, they bring up abortion. And then they fearmonger about, oh my God, they're going to take abortion away from you. They're going to make you slaves to men and all this nonsense. It's a Republican boogeyman that they create. They create the image of the Republican boogeyman who wants to raid the lockbox and hand the money to Wall Street. It's nonsense. They're actually the ones who do this. But it's a great campaign strategy. But look what's happened here. Trump's turned that whole thing on its head. By suspending payments, collections until Q4, he's directly appealing to workers saying, you need the money now, not in 40 to 50 years from now. And he's right. If he wins re-election, he's already threatened to make it permanent. Because if he wins re-election, he's assuming he's going to retake the House and retake the Senate. Now, there's no guarantee of that. But I'll tell you that if he has as strong a mandate as I think he could wind up with, then the Republicans retaking the House is possible, and a rhino-proof majority in the Senate. And I mean by a rhino-proof majority in the Senate, I mean that you overcome the Mitt Romneys, the Lisa Murkowskis, and the Susan Collinses. We're all friggin' Democrats and or globalists, but I repeat myself. So normally, kind of attacking the idea of Social Security by suspending payroll taxes would be political suicide because the Democrats would then immediately go out and demagogue the whole issue. But Trump's not saying he's not going to make Social Security payments. We're just going to deficit spend it. We're deficit spending everything else. Why shouldn't we deficit spend Social Security at this point? Wouldn't it be better to just print the money to pay the Social Security checks while at the same time lifting the burden of people having to pay Social Security tax up front for right now? And then even better, forgive that payment into the system at a later date, i.e. after the election, when he can legislatively have the power to get that done? That's a big promise. That's an enormous promise. That's one of the biggest promises I've ever heard from an American president. That fundamentally alters and shifts the complete trajectory of the American political system. Fundamentals. It attacks social engineering, going back to the Hoover administration, for Christ's sake. So normally this would be political suicide, but what Trump has done here is he's used the intransigence of the Democrats who fight him on everything. So if he says 2 + 2 = 4, they go, well, really, under certain circumstances, it could be 5. Or, hey, isn't it a beautiful blue sky today? Well, it's really closer to purple today than it is blue. You know that, don't you? You're just Trump, and you're always wrong. These people are so easy to counter. It's not funny. All you have to do is, if Trump says X, they say not X. And so he can always shift the narrative where he wants. Always shift to the Overton window wherever he wants to, simply because they are reflexively anti-him, which is a dumb position to take. But it's what they've done for 4 years, and they've done nothing but continue to alienate more and more people. So at this point, he's like, hey, I will lend you federal troops to stop the rioting. Not riots, they're just protests. This is just legitimate protest. We don't need help. No. Oh, now you're sending in stormtroopers to protect federal property, which is his job. Like, at what point do they not just look like unctuous little trolls? They look like the goblins from frickin' Harry Potter, for Christ's sake. And even those guys are, at least, they have an ethos, money. At this point, the only thing the Democrats have as an ethos is power. And every time one of them opens their mouth, that's all you see. Because you got to realize, everybody knows that Social Security is fundamentally broken. We've moved into where the boomers are all collecting their checks now. Gen X's younger workers have known that it's broke and know, like me, they've never expected to get much, if anything, from it. Ron Paul ran a very successful presidential campaign in 2008 and 2012 saying these exact things and saying, look, let's just keep our promises to the people who are on Social Security and about to go on it. Basically, the baby boomers, let's just bribe them with it and let the millennials and let Gen X out of their obligations to it. Let's just end this program. It's a dumb program. It is a Ponzi scheme. It is the single biggest unfunded liability of the U.S. government. It is the single thing that creates our long-term deficit spending model and our budget deficits, and it can't be fixed. There's no way to fix a demographic Ponzi scheme. There's no way to fix it. It has to be sunsetted. So what Trump has done here is he started the process of getting people used to the idea of not having to pay upfront for it. And by getting people used to that, you can change the system completely. 6 months ago, we weren't used to wearing masks. Now, all of a sudden, there's a lot of people who are out there comfortable wearing masks for some dumb reason. You can make people inured to the burden by making it regular. Milton Friedman always famously said that if Americans had to pay all their taxes on April 15th in one lump check and had to write a check to the federal government for every dollar of tax they owed, there would be tax revolt on April 16th. And this is why we instituted pay-as-you-go payroll taxes in order to soften the blow of how much you're actually paying in on a weekly basis. And it's always interesting when a teenager gets their first check and they open it up for the first time and they see just how much money the government steals from them. They're like, but, and then they get used to it. So if you remove that, and all of a sudden people are used to getting that extra $30 to $40 or $50 or $100 in their paycheck every week, depending on how much money they make. And this, by the way, again, that $30 to an 18-year-old at his first job, even though it's only $30 or $20 or whatever it is that they take out in Social Security, that's $20. That's a tank of gas. That's the difference between buying new shoes at the end of the month or buying a new shirt or any, it's all the basic things you need to live your life and not having to do without them. It's having a little bit of money to be able to blow off steam with, which kids are going to blow off steam anyway. So you get people used to not paying this is the key to weaning them off of the idea that they should ever have to pay it in the damn first place. You put the money in people's checks, and the Democrats know this. This is how they got Social Security enshrined as a political verity, by doing exactly this, by making it a regular payout, and then saying, "Oh, look, this is a good thing. It's enforced savings. It's all that stuff." They know that the reverse is just going to be just as true. That once people get that bump in pay, they're not going to want to give it back later, and then everybody will start questioning the basics of the social engineering of enforced savings versus paying rent, because that's the choice in front of a lot of Americans right now. Why should I be saving for a future 30, 40, 50 years from now when I can't make next month's rent? Why can't I have that money right now to make my rent so I can continue to keep a roof over my children's head, so I can put food on the frickin' table, so that I have enough money to be able to put gas in the car to go to a job interview? Moreover, it keeps money in the local economy. It liquefies the local economy, spending on things locally. It not just stimulates demand, it actually returns what should be normal demand back into the local economy, as opposed to having been forcibly extracted away under some kind of austerity thing. So if Trump wants to win, so that's the basics. Now, if Trump really wants to win the election, all he has to do is now turn this into a racial issue, because Social Security is the most racist of all taxes. It's not income taxes. Most lower income people in this country don't pay taxes. As a matter of fact, they get the earned income tax credit, and they get paid not to pay taxes, which is an unbelievably perverse incentive, and something I talked about in previous podcasts, where going from being non-working and going to working, or going from working poor to working middle class, your marginal tax rate is enormous. You go from not paying taxes to now paying taxes, and that difference over a very small income rise is enormous. And you go from, your salary goes up by $5,000 a year and your tax bill goes up by $7,000 a year. Because all of a sudden you lost the earned income tax credit and you gained the privilege of paying taxes. And now all of a sudden, whatever the numbers are, it doesn't matter. It's just that the idea is that it's a high marginal rate on the next dollar earned, which is all that really matters, because it's the tax rate on the next dollar earned, the marginal rate, that is what is the barrier to wealth creation and to a stable middle class and to lifting people out of poverty. Okay? But going back to what I was just saying about how Social Security is the most racist of all taxes, it is nothing but a wealth transfer when viewed dispassionately from black males to white females. The difference in life expectancy between them is over 9 years. American women, on average, in the United States, live to almost 82 years. Black men's life expectancy has risen dramatically in the last 10 years to a high of 72.7 years. I just looked this up. For all the current recipients of Social Security, the life expectancy of black men was under the age of collection. It was like 66 years old back in the first time I did this. I did this analysis for myself back in like 2005, 2006. I'm like, this is a pay-as-you-go death tax on the working poor and on black men. It's a terrible thing. For generations, they paid into Social Security only to die at 65, 66, 67 years old and collect 1/10 of what they paid into it. Meanwhile, white women are living longer, and they're the ones that have been bribed off in ever-increasing numbers with ever-increasing Social Security checks by Democrats all throughout the 80s and 90s. And even the Republicans are just as bad. So when you view this dispassionately, what you have to, this is the way I want you to look at it. And when I frame Social Security's 12.4% tax rate this way, you will never be in favor of it ever again. And if you are, then you're a hopeless frickin' socialist jackass. Ready? It's a 12.4% interest payment against your labor. That's what it is. Your labor, in order for you to work in the marketplace, you're effectively in debt to the society to the rate of 12.4% before you earn your first dollar. And everybody has to pay it for the first $137,000 that they make in a calendar year. Now, no financial planner in the world would ever advise you to take out a 12.5% loan when you're 18 years old to buy a car or buy a house. Though, if you're 18 years old and you're trying to buy a car, that would probably be the interest rate you would pay, if you could even get the credit in this, even in a predatory lending market like we have today. No one would ever advise you to do that. It would be the height of irresponsibility on the part of financial planners or anybody else. And yet the government makes this mandatory. This is a grift. It's all it is. And it creates an immense burden for many low-income workers. And it's the difference between building wealth and staying trapped at whatever socioeconomic level they are. And if you ever listen really closely to the people who argue most strenuously for Social Security, and they're what Michael Malice calls the midwit set, or what Nassim Nicholas Taleb calls IYIs, intellectuals yet idiots. If you listen to them carefully, what you're hearing is, we don't want the competition of those people moving into the middle class, because then they're going to attack our nice, cushy upper middle class jobs, which allow us to drink cheap wines and pontificate about how friggin' smart and insouciant we are as we protect them from themselves. When you really break this down, at the beginning of your work life, your labor is worth the least. You have the fewest amount of skills. You have the least amount of experience you'll ever have in your life, right? You have to learn how to become a valuable worker. That's why you're paid less than other people. A living wage of $15 an hour for somebody to jockey the fry station over at McDonald's is ridiculous. It doesn't matter how much it costs you to live in a living wage. You should be asking yourself not how much it costs for you to live, but why it's so damn expensive for people to live in America. And when you start asking that question, you start really digging into why it's so difficult. But you have no skills. You have no experience. Those early jobs are really paid internships Why should you be paying Social Security tax on this? And the amount of money you're paying into the system at that point, it's not like they're compounding it. They're not buying treasury bonds with it and investing it in order to grow it. It's all just money in, money out. It's all just accrual accounting, for Christ's sake. It's just dumb, right? Your prime earning years are between the ages of 40 and 60. It's when you're going to make most of your money. It's when you're going to pay most of the money into Social Security anyway. And you need the money when you're 18. That $20 or $30 or $40 is worth a lot more to you because of marginal utility of those dollars. You have few dollars. So the marginal utility of every extra dollar in your pocket is a lot higher than the person making $200,000 a year, where the marginal utility of that next dollar is, it's not as important. Which is why rich people don't really mind paying taxes that much. And they are, and assholes like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates are willing to say that. Yeah, because they've got much more money than they need. They don't know what to do with it all. But for the person making $25,000 a year, going from $25,000 to $25,500 should not be taxed at the rate of 15% between Social Security and Medicare off the top, and then add income tax on top of it. That marginal tax rate is insane. You go from having no disposable monthly income to having $20 worth. Well, what happens if it was $30? It's a 50% marginal tax rate on the money that matters to you. So it's horrific that people have to pay this. And this is a horrific job market today where unskilled labor costs even more than it normally would, because now you've got skilled labor out there vying for unskilled jobs and willing to take them at unskilled labor rates. So these people are never going to pay into the Social Security system anyway. So why even just go through the fiction of saying you have to collect it? We go through the fiction of collecting it, and you go through the fiction of paying it. It's crazy. It's just dumb. Remove it. Remove that tax cost. Remove that marginal burden. And that allows more marginal workers on the positive side of the employment ledger. It means that an employer who has $10 an hour to pay for labor could actually hire 1.5 people as opposed to one, if we're talking a $7 an hour minimum wage, which is not even realistic anymore. Let's say you have $15 an hour to spend. He pays one guy $10 an hour. Well, with Social Security, he can't really pay when you got to add in all the employer's costs and every other damn thing. That $15 is sucked up by government overhead. Get rid of that government overhead, as much of it as possible. Now all of a sudden, he might be able to hire some unskilled 16 or 17-year-old kid for 10 or 12 hours a week. There's a huge difference. That's a kid that's 10 hours or 12 hours a week that's not out there dressing in black and destroying businesses and thinking that Antifa's got the answers for him. Unfortunately, those same marginal employers are also having to compete with people like George Soros, who are paying these kids $25 an hour to go destroy their businesses. This is the kind of perverse incentives that our system has created. But it frees them up to start building wealth earlier in the years and pulls forward those prime earning years and making retirement savings during those years that much easier and that much more effective. On top of that, it shifts the mode of savings within the entire economy away from government bonds and into private insurance. Those kids who are smart, who are well taught and well educated, may buy some private life insurance when it's incredibly cheap when you're 18 years old, and let that policy build wealth for you over time. Forced savings is the recipe for what we have today. Social Security is paying out far more than people put in, raising the burden on younger workers who can afford it the least. And it's created a generation of boomers with $63,000 in their 401ks and hoping to live on Social Security and the proceeds of selling their house to the greater fool. It's a Ponzi scheme. And Trump is right to begin dismantling that Ponzi scheme by taking away the collection of the tax in the first place, and then threatening to just dismantle the whole taxing system after that. It's the exactly right thing. Our argument for a living wage was always predicated on making labor costs in the United States higher in order to drive it up and become tax competitive with the insanely overtaxed European Union, because, of course, we all know, as I've said multiple times, the whole purpose of the current political drive on the left is to destroy the United States and transfer the wealth and power of the United States to the European Union and the EU superstate, which is undemocratically appointed as opposed to elected. And that's where we are. Social Security was always the most racist tax in the United States because it disadvantaged black males the most. If that's what's got white women out there genuflecting to BLM and doing the white guilt thing, then fine. But they should ask for absolution on that issue alone, because they have stolen from generations of black men. It's not the reparations for slavery. It should be reparations for Social Security. And so if Trump makes this payroll tax cut permanent and revamps capital gains as well, which he's threatening to do with a new executive order, which he'll have to do through indexing the capital gains basis to inflation, which is how we'll get it done, because he won't be able to do it any other way. He has to go to Congress to actually change the capital gains rate. But if he does that in his second term, he may just save the United States from its worst fiscal nightmare scenario. It's already horrific. Okay? But at the very least, if this crisis does nothing but actually start to cut through the shibboleths of American political life and begin the process of people just looking at this dumb freaking social engineering through the tax code as the poison that's killing all of us, it may have been worth it. All right, this has been the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast for Tuesday, August 11, 2020. If you like what you heard today, give a like and subscribe. You can find me on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, YouTube. It doesn't really matter. I'm everywhere. And we'll be back next week with either another rant or some kind of great insouciant guest. I think I'll try and get somebody to show up next week. I think you guys are probably tired of listening to my voice. You guys take care. You be well. We'll talk soon. And keep your shit on the ice.